How Trump's emergency powers could become permanent. Ross Rosenfield writing for the New Republic. This is a little bit of history here that I was unaware of. The word dictator, like the person who can dictate how things must be, the word dictator was created in the early Roman Republic. It was when a single person was given immense power in an emergency, and it wasn't always the leader. Sometimes it was delegated to somebody else, and initially it was always temporary. The dictator did not rule in perpetuity. In fact, Cincinnatus, Lucius Quintus Cincinnatus, was George Washington's hero from the Roman era, and Cincinnatus was given that power 3 times, in fact. 3 times he was brought in as the Roman Republic was having problems and made dictator for a period of months. He righted the ship, and each time he left and went back to being a farmer, which is what he ultimately did after the 3rd time. That was it, no more politics, which is what George Washington did after his 2nd term. And he cited Cincinnatus. So anyhow, that's the history of it. But the problem is that it started out as this kind of noble experiment about dealing with, upheaval or crisis or famine or weather changes or invasion. Something that was not expected that caused you to need to be able to do things quickly without having to go through their version of the parliament, the Senate, the Roman Senate. And by 131 AD, it had, or 121 BC, when Gaius Gracchus was made a dictator by a Senate decree, the Senatus Consultum Ultimum, it suspended due process and shielded the senators themselves from any actions that they took. And what that did is it set the stage for Sulla, 40 years later, to use that exact same legislative procedure to basically crush democracy in the Roman Republic. He made himself dictator for life. He was followed by Julius Caesar, who did the same thing after his war against Pompey the Great. And that was the end of the Roman Republic and the beginning of the Roman dictatorship. Ross Rosenfield also points out that there is no specific mention of emergency powers in the U.S. Constitution, which I find fascinating. In fact, it was only in 1976 that the Congress passed the Emergency Powers Act, giving presidents the power to, do all kinds of wild things. But the bill says basically that Congress has to grant that power to the president. And in fact, the Supreme Court overturned that provision that says Congress must do this in 1983 in a case called INS versus Chadha. While leaving in place the president's emergency powers, they took away Congress's ability to regulate those emergency powers, which is wild, particularly since this is a bill that was passed by Congress in 1976. Emergency powers have been used frequently, largely since the Reagan administration. Ronald Reagan did it 6 times, including to impose sanctions on apartheid South Africa, which is probably going to give Trump a fit. Bill Clinton used it a whopping 18 times to stop Middle Eastern terrorism, to stop Iran from enriching uranium. George W. Bush declared states of emergency 14 times. Barack Obama did the same 14 times. And Trump has done it a number of times. He used it to bypass Congress to build the wall in the southern border. Joe Biden was, tried to apply them for his plan for student debt relief, but that got overturned by the Supreme Court. And Trump has so far declared 8 national emergencies in just 3 months. He's used them to militarize the southern border, to enact tariffs, and to push through more fossil fuel permits. But the big danger is that the state of emergency, as happened in the Roman Republic, will become permanent. And once that happens, it's no longer an emergency, it's now the new normal, and the new normal means that you don't have the rights, you don't have the constitutional protections, you don't have the guardrails that you used to have. And this is something we should be very, very concerned with, particularly given how Donald Trump is producing these declarations of emergency in situations where quite clearly no emergency exists. His whole ability to deport people is based on the emergency that he has declared, saying that President Maduro in Venezuela, via a Venezuelan gang, Tre de Agua, has invaded the United States, that it's a foreign, hostile invasion army, when in fact it's not. It's not even remotely, not at all. You know, he's used that, by the way, to militarize the southern border also. And now we've got the army down there. I mean, this is just wild stuff. So keep an eye on these states of emergency, these declarations of emergency, and let's hope, I mean, you know, they have been challenged in court, and let's hope that those challenges make their way to the Supreme Court. It would be a very, very good thing.